What's up, disciples? Welcome to the Red Letter Disciple. I'm Zach Zinder, and in a moment, I'll be joined by my co-host, Chris Johnson, and we have a mission here at Red Letter Disciple to challenge you to be a greater disciple of Jesus, because we really believe that you have greatness inside of you, and the world needs to see that greatness so they can meet Jesus. The world needs a better, truer, fresher, greater expression of Jesus, and we can be that. And so let's do that together. Hey, I'm really excited about today's episode. We've got an incredible guest. His name is Patrick O'Connell, the global director of an organization called New Thing, which helps catalyze church movements across the world. Patrick will not only talk about what it looks like to be a disciple in America, but also what we can learn from discipleship overseas, and also like how do we change the scorecard for what it really means to be a disciple and live out our lives as a follower of Jesus today. Super helpful conversation. Today's episode is sponsored by Red Letter Living. We create resources that challenge people to grow as disciples wherever they are. So this podcast is one of those resources. But how do you really know if you're following Jesus well? You know, we talk a lot about the scorecard when it comes to Patrick O'Connell, and we really believe that we can be a help in that. We've created a thing called the Red Letter Challenge Assessment. It's a 40-question. Takes about 7 to 10 minutes, but as you answer these questions, what you're going to find is it'll score you according to the 5 discipleship targets we believe come out of the mouth of Jesus the most often: be, forgive, serve, give, go. It'll not only rank you in those, but it'll give you next steps and even challenges to complete to become stronger in those 5 targets. Because if we're going to change the scorecard, let's at least know what targets we're aiming for. So you can check that out at redletterassessment.com. Again, it's a totally free assessment. It takes about 7 to 10 minutes, and we believe it's really going to be helpful in your journey to be a greater disciple. So if you like our podcast, if it's doing what we say it's going to do, challenging you or even helping you to be a greater disciple, we'd love for you to throw 5 stars at us and rate and review on whatever platform you're listening or watching. That means the world to us. Subscribe and follow as well so that we can keep bringing more of this content to you. I know Chris and I, we love to do it, but we also we kind of need you to help us do this more. Anyway, all that said, we got a great episode with Patrick O'Connell. Let's do this. Alrighty, we got a great episode today. We got a good friend of mine, Patrick O'Connell, joining us on the podcast. Patrick is the director of New Thing. So excited to talk about New Thing, which has got a mission to catalyze movements of reproducing churches all over the world.
Catalyze sounds like a science experiment.
But they're doing it. They're doing it all over the world. So Patrick has graduated college, had a stint in the Army, and then went into the corporate world. And then in 2007, decided to move with a team of people to Kansas City to do church planting. And now he really helps church planters and create movements. He's become a student of church planting. So excited to have him on. He's married to Nancy, has 3 awesome kids. Patrick O'Connell, welcome to the Red Letter Disciple.
Thanks, guys. Great to be with you, and thanks for having me.
That would have been a real shame if you had 2 awesome kids and one that was kind of not great.
I have 3 cool kids and a new grandson that is really awesome.
Oh, congratulations. That is cool because you can give them back. You know what I mean?
Is that your first grandchild?
Yep. Yeah, it's changed the game. I'll tell you that.
and is it true what they say that, I mean, the reason you have kids is so that one day you would have grandkids? Are you finding that to be truth?
Totally true. You said it. Don't tell my kids.
I found that to be true now.
You're not a grandfather.
No, but from the kids side, once I had grandkids, it's like, I'm whatever. And then my grand boys, Nathan and Brady, are pretty awesome.
They're the golden children. I got you. So you're catalyze. I don't hear that used like a verb like you use. Like you're the director of catalysm. You're catalyzing.
Cataclysm.
Oh, yeah, I got you. Yeah, expound upon that. What's that mean?
Yeah, it's really trying to embrace this idea, this notion that the church is a movement. And it started as a movement, and it's best when it is a movement. And there has been some degree of institutionalization, calcification that has taken place in the church over the course of the last 500-600 years.
That's a sweet way to say it. Yeah, go ahead.
And what we try to do is we try to help everyday, ordinary disciples of Jesus kind of figure out that they can do it, that we come alongside them. But it's really, really leaning into this Acts 1:8 notion that You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And I get stoked about movement. I want to see the church embrace that.
So if Patrick comes to your church and says you're pretty calcified, that's a tough one.
You're probably arguing over the color of the rugs, and that what I say is like, let's try just everybody read Acts 1:8 again, okay?
Spirit filled. All right, we're going to get to more of how we get out of the calcification. But first, Patrick, hey man, walk me through your journey. I mentioned Army, corporate world, Kansas City church planting, now director of New Thing. Like, yeah, how'd you get to where you are today?
And I'm sure at the beginning of that process, you thought, I'm going to do all these steps so I can be a great church planter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Not even close. No, I'm proof that God has a sense of humor, and I'm double proof that God can use anyone for his perfect plan in the world. I mean, so true. I'm from Chicagoland. My parents divorced when I was young, and we have a Catholic background. And once my parents divorced, that was the end of anything for me to do with Jesus. And in fact, and I'm just not being, dramatic about it. I didn't know anybody following Jesus when I was growing up. Just wasn't part of the vernacular for me. And so that led to basically me trying to find my path in life. I wanted to be an educator, and got to teach in some really cool locations, got to do some fun stuff. But once I got out of the Army and was, had a kid, it was time to get my career on. And I had this weird set of circumstances that got me into the investment world. So here's a kid from the burbs of Chicago, working with millionaires and billionaires on their investments. And so, but I didn't have any relationship with Jesus.
And so, did you think to yourself during that time, like, what am I doing working with millionaires and billionaires? Like, not saying that you felt like a phony, but sometimes I felt like a phony, like in previous, and they're coming to you wanting to know this advice. And you're like, yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a total imposter syndrome. But it's funny because now that, and we can talk about this later if you're interested, but I look over my shoulder now and I see so much that came out of that 10 years. And I see I've built on so many of the things that I've learned in that 10 years. But no, there was really no life with Jesus until my early 30s. Okay. And then just came into a time of my bleakest season personally, my season of great despair. And that's where God got a hold of my life. And that church happened to be Community Christian Church, where Dave Ferguson is the lead pastor. And that set off a whole nother chain reaction of events that God had in mind that I didn't.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
So yeah, it's awesome, good friend. What was it at age, you said, I think 33, that all of a sudden like this started to become a thing for you?
Yeah, I think, even to Chris's point, I was following a scorecard that had been given to me. I was pursuing a dream that really was, get the White House and the picket fence and all that in the burbs. And once you get that, you're like, man, yeah, there's really not much here, is there? And that really made me it pissed me off a bit, made me a little bit angry. I was kind of a crappy dad to my kids. I was a crappy husband. I wasn't emotionally available for them. I was just going through my own funk. And I had always been a fan of Jesus. I really had. I was the kid who took religious studies and philosophy in college, right? That's me. But I just didn't see that in the church. I didn't see Jesus and the church. And I'm like, wow, there's a massive difference here. And then just by a whole bunch of relational sequences that I can't put my finger on, we found our way into church. And the story there is my wife went first and brought our kids for 3 years without me.
Wow.
3 years. I wouldn't even let her talk about what she was listening to. Whoa. I wouldn't let her talk about, I was that guy. So that's the great irony of my life.
Yeah.
I think that's encouraging though, because I know we have a lot of listeners who are, wives who are married and their husbands who may be the dad of some kids just aren't a part of church yet. And a lot of these women were praying that the husbands do come along. And so I love that it was 3 years, but it happened and God answered those prayers for you and your family.
So I have a quick question. What was it that finally you said, okay, after 3 years, this was the motivating catalyst for you to get back into church? What was it?
Twofold, I think. Number one is I think we all come to that personal place that I say I came to the end of my rope. I was out. I was out of answers. It was a season of deep, deep despair for me personally. Second, though, was I had maybe to transition disciples. I didn't have the language for that right now. Then sure. I didn't have the understanding I have now. But I had women and men, everyday, ordinary people who showed me the love of Jesus. And I wasn't looking for it.
Right.
It's just who they are. And then I believe now, and I've got all the theological degrees and all that now, but I understand that that's the Holy Spirit working in and through them into my life. Cool. And that was a game changer. So personal despair and relationships with people that were actually trying to figure out what it looked like to be on mission with Jesus in life.
So would you say that basically you ran out of, if I'm hearing you correctly, you basically ran out of different options and you're like, heck, I might as well try this. Like they seem to be good people. I'll give it a shot. What else do I have to lose? Like
it was the Yeah, that's exactly right. It was the embodiment of what I understood about Jesus. Like when you're in despair, when you're looking for answers in life, when you have nothing, when you're just like in a free fall in life, should I make more money? Should I go to that career? Should I get divorced? Should I when you're in that sequence of life, you're looking for answers. And I think that's so much of what we got to be reminded of. People are looking for answers. They might not articulate in that way. And when I thought, hey, Jesus could be really cool. Frankly, Jesus could be really cool for the world if it weren't for Christians. And I love you guys now. I am one of you. Yeah. But when I encountered everyday, ordinary women and men who were just trying to be followers of Jesus, who basically said, "Follow me as I follow Jesus," that God worked. God worked in my life.
That's cool.
There are two other things I'll add real quick, because I think when we start following Jesus, it's steps of obedience. So at Community, where Dave is pastor, still, there are a couple of things that you hear loud and clear. Number one is get into community, get into a small group with others and start doing life with others. Don't just come on Sundays.
Right.
So that was number one. And then two was make a decision to be baptized. A personal decision to be baptized. And literally the night that I was baptized, my small group leader, because I did what I was told, my small group leader asked me to be his apprentice small group leader. I was literally wet and said, "Hey, I see in you some leadership potential. You should lead a small group with me." And that set off this whole journey on leadership that led to church planting and led to even what I'm doing today.
You could have at least let you towel off. That's like, that seems wrong. Like,
that's great.
Like, we're always asking for apprentices at Community. No time like the present.
I just put on a new shirt.
And your story is a big reason why this podcast exists, because we want to change the narrative and change the story. And when people are in a place of despair, no matter how they got there, even if they can't really answer what's wrong, what it takes are faithful, committed, Jesus following people to show up in their lives. And sometimes it takes years. And so I think that's really cool and hopefully encouraging to those who are walking alongside someone who hasn't quite gotten it yet, is don't give up, keep being that person. And at the right time, God's going to move in that person's life. And I actually collectively believe, and I want your opinion on this, because this may be a subjective hunch of mine, but I feel like with everything that's happened the last few years, when I've sort of traveled around a little bit more in this particular year, 2023, and visited churches or conferences, it feels like there's a little bit, it feels like there's a lot more like hunger. I think there are more people that are recognizing that the top of the ladder for your sake or whatever it might be, it isn't quite what it was cracked up to be. And there's now this hunger. And I really believe we're in an opportune time to come alongside of that and say, here's what it's all about. What are your thoughts as you travel around? I know you do that a lot. You work overseas, and we'll get into some of your work there too. Like, is there a hunger that you're seeing now that maybe didn't exist a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think your assessment is exactly right. And Zach, that's why I love just the whole thesis of Red Letter. Focusing on Jesus. And what I think is true is in this post-Christian, post-modern, post-COVID, post-world, whatever we look at, where truth is relative, right? That's the larger ethos of the culture, right? It's what my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. And I see people, and the problem is there's competing sources of truth. So you can't say everybody needs truth. You need truth to wake up every day and do life. And I think what I see, and I hope and believe it's a move of the Lord, it's a move of the Holy Spirit, is I see a generation who are open to following, but they want to do it in an authentic and an honest way about Jesus. They don't want their parents' version, and I mean that respectfully.
Sure.
They don't want their parents' version of church. They don't want to be. I had a global friend of mine say last week. He said, we were talking about American discipleship, and he said, it seems to me as your friend, you all in America use discipleship, but you don't use it in a biblical sense. You don't use it in the way where you're asking people to follow and give everything to being a disciple. And so I think to your point, Zach, I'm circling around it. There is absolutely a hunger because that's as old as humanity. Nothing's changed in that sense. Augustine says that hole in our spirits is always there. And I do think there is a hunger, but it's not going to be church as we know it in that sense. We can go into that, but that's my immediate response to your insight.
That's good.
Well, now, I mean, come on. You can't leave that hanging there. You basically just said, it's not going to be like it, but if you have a secret, I'll tell you. What is it going to look like? Tell us.
Yeah. This is where I think movement. I think we have to recapture the ethos, the essence that we are part of a movement, that we stand on the shoulders of women and men who have gone before us. We're here in such a time as this, and we will seed the movement into the future. And therefore, the analogy or the metaphor that I use is we need to be more about kingdom than we need to be about castles. And particularly in the West, we're just great castle builders. We just build, we have marquees on our castle. We have turrets with flags. We have social media going across our castles. Yeah. And you know what I'm saying? The castles aren't bad, but the castles belong to the king. And I think you have an awakening that, and this is where I get excited because collaboration and globalization are on the rise in the church. And I think a new day is upon us in those opportunities. So I want to see the church capture and embrace, I should say, its movemental kind of historical postures. I think we'll see God do amazing things.
Awesome. So give me a few from your vantage point then, ideas or ways, and take this either collectively as a church or personally, individually. We can move from kingdoms, we can move from castles and think kingdoms.
Yeah.
Because I gotta be honest with you, I'm trying to build a castle right now. I just planted a church.
Just make sure it belongs to the king.
I know, and my castle is in a high school gym right now, so it doesn't look very castle-y.
I did think the throne room chair you have on stage is just interesting.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, Chris.
Oh, never.
Let me answer the questions about church leaders, if I may. I spend my life working alongside and with leaders of churches, church planters, denominational leaders, etc. And I'm grateful for them. But I think one of the first things we just have to realize is there's two things. Number one is that the scorecard we have inherited is,
I know where he's going,
maybe the wrong scorecard, right? Right. Yeah. So church growth, I'm not opposed to church growth. I think God can do all things. But if you think about your own schedule, just as a church leader, my guess is if you're like most of us, you're going to spend 80 to 90% of your schedule this week working on castles and building castles, right? That's great. So what would it look like to start making more time for kingdom? So I think it's a scorecard issue. And then I would say that the second issue is this idea of stewardship. And we've got to, if we're church leaders, I think we got to really wrestle. And this is deeply personal, right? Because if you're going to mess with my scorecard now, you're going to tell me everything I'm doing is wrong. No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that if your scorecard is not a kingdom scorecard, maybe you got to align your scorecard with the kingdom scorecard. And then secondly is you've got to take the burden off your shoulders of doing it all. You're a steward. You are inheriting all the things, the resources, the buildings, the people, the teams. You're stewarding them for such a time as this, and then you're going to plant that into the next generation. And I think if you're a leader, I mean, man, if I want to have a generational impact, I don't want to just, because, if you guys are, where I'm going with this, right? So scorecard and stewardship, I think, are two interesting ideas for me these days as we're wrestling this out with leaders of churches.
Patrick, I would like to talk to you every Monday, because this is I don't know what you charge per minute, but this is fantastic. No. So here's the thing, though, but people are so used to, for instance, I planted a church 6 weeks ago, right? Yeah. The number one thing I get text on Monday, how was Sunday? How many people did you have? And I have to flip that script a little bit and say, okay, we might have had 100, but the thing that is the win for me is that we had 20% of the people that were there had never experienced church with Jesus. That is the win. So for me, it's so easy to get ground down being in the church for 20 years. If you don't have 400 people in a weekend, what are you doing wrong? And it's discouraging. I think that's why a lot of pastors get burned out too.
You're exactly right. So we sometimes say, well, they couldn't handle it, or they couldn't do it, or they're not, read more leadership books, go do it, right?
Even barely
wait, maybe it's the system that's flawed. Maybe we have a systematic issue here where we are crushing, literally, spiritually, emotionally, sometimes physically crushing leaders who really look. Most leaders I know didn't get into the game to lead budgets and lead teams and study books on leadership. They love Jesus. They're following Jesus. They want others to come along. Yeah. So to your point, let's at least admit that the scorecard needs to be tweaked.
Yes.
Let's at least admit that sometimes, and you asked a very good question. This is so deeply baked in. Our paradigm,
right,
is so deeply baked into who we are and what we do and how we expend resources and our time.
Yes.
But we've got to get some space to start negotiating this with one another. Now, if that happens in a denomination, if that happens in a church, I'm all for it.
Right.
But there's got to be some place to say, are we actually winning at the end of the day? If
what is winning?
People come to church.
Right. What is winning now in 2023?
That's right. That's right.
Is it participation in small groups? Is it discipleship? Is it the scorecard, like you said, it feels confusing as a new church plant. What is the win?
I think it is discipleship. And I know you guys are passionate about that, but that's what I think it is. I think that's what we've all realized. We haven't made disciples.
So, Patrick, how would you measure discipleship then? What would a scorecard look like for you that's tweaked?
I would say if you can walk on water, it feels like it's pretty successful.
Maybe it's easier if you could just turn up tables.
Right. Yeah. My final exam for my disciples is I take them to a park and I give them a couple loaves of bread and some fish.
And say good luck.
And I say, feed everybody. Is that the wrong path?
No, I think it's funny. I was able to teach at one of our community locations this weekend. What do we need to see more disciples? I think we need to understand that the discipleship is relational, not just cognitive. A lot of American-built discipleship programs are teach me more, fill my head more.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but we don't actually live all that out. And then I think a dependence on God, which is a deeply that's the move of the Spirit, right? Where I begin to open up my life and my hands, my resources, my time, and I start giving it over to, no, Jesus, this is all yours. This is not mine. This is not, and I think the way, when we talk about a disciple at community, we say simply hear from God and go do what he says.
I like that.
And it's not very sophisticated, is it? I like the other kind of image for this, for me, the one that's helpful for me is follow me as I follow Jesus.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's that simple for me. I know that's complex, but it's simple in its messaging.
Yeah, I think that's so good, and I really do think that's going back to the basics, and that's what I say often is the best way to follow Jesus is to follow Jesus. We don't need a new plan. We don't need to be thinking about how do we disciple people. The question I'm trying to point people back to, the simple question to start it all on our discipleship path: Are you committed to following Jesus? He told us what to do. It's in his red letters. Just do it. So I love the the simplicity of the language.
Even if I may use Chris's example of church planning,
Please do.
This will be
and spending time with these young people. You are discipling them.
Yeah.
And no disrespect, but you're discipling them, and then the paradigm is get them to a church.
Right.
So you're already a church. You know that.
Right.
You're already discipling these. So what does it look like for you to linger in that tension?
So,
where Sunday still is the worship moment, it still is the collect moment.
Right.
That's actually not where church is, right?
Right.
Church is out there. So,
but the interesting thing, you mentioned something earlier, and I was just thinking about this because as a church planner, I wake up every morning at 3 a.m. and I sleep because I'm constantly hammered with the doubts of my own mind. That's a very candid moment in truth. Yes. But so I was saying to my team, my core group team, like Sunday is where we come and we experience. It's the only place left on earth where we can experience the gift of God. Like you can't go to the golf course and experience the gifts of God. We come here. Oh, shush. We come here because, God forgives us in communion. We experience baptism. It's like a literal gift, right? But discipleship doesn't really happen in Sunday morning. So we create small groups where we can build authentic relationships with one another. But here's the challenge. Like 20% of my church is brand new believers. And now I'm telling them, not only should you come on Sunday, you should come in the middle of the week because that's where discipleship happens. And they're like, bro, I barely can make it to Sunday. Like, and that's the challenge, man. So like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
You make it, no, I think you're identifying. When I was in the military, the first rule is situational awareness. Know what's happening around you.
Yeah.
I think this is the challenge that we find ourselves in sometimes in North America. I'm a North American leader, right? But I get to hang out with a lot of global leaders. We have turned discipleship, by and large, not everyone, but into a transaction. And it's a relationship. And relationships can happen on Sunday, but they also happen a lot other places.
Right.
And can somebody be a follower of Jesus and never attend a Sunday gathering? Sure. I don't, I would argue that no, they should attend a Sunday gathering as well to celebrate with the body, to be present with the Spirit in the congregation, like all those things that we love about Sunday.
It's harder, but
it's absolutely. And if, but it's way beyond just the transaction of showing up to a building and doing the thing that we call church. I'm not opposed to that, but it's much more than that.
Right. That's really good. Yeah.
So you mentioned that dependence on God is a huge piece of discipleship. And so part of your story, again, we go back to when you were 33, you got connected at Community, you got baptized, and before the towel was on, you were... By the way, I like that.
That's a genius, because you're all pumped up. You're like, what am I going to do next?
Well, I think that sometimes that's where we miss out is in the discipleship experience when we don't call up, invite, challenge other people to step into what Jesus wants for them. I think we miss out on opportunities. And sometimes it's not because they don't want to, it's because they have been asked. And so you stepped up into that. And then not long after, your heart was stirring even more to depend on God even more. And then it meant leaving the corporate world and going to Kansas City to plant a church. And so I'd love to go back to that moment of like taking, and again, this isn't for everybody that you need to leave the business world and go to church planting by any means, but for you, that was right. So I'd love for you to kind of unpack how did you know that was the next step in your journey? And
part 2 to that question, after we baptize somebody, should we ask them to be a part of the toughest jobs to get people to sign up for? And then we say, next week, can you do parking?
That's right. No, I love the spirit of the question. We have a tool that we've used at New Thing for years, and we call it the I see in you conversation. And it's this idea that God's going to use me to see help you see something about yourself that you can't see. So here I am, 32, 33, really out of answers when it comes to my own personal life, have some military background and the corporate background. And the idea that I could lead a small group was like, that didn't exist in my paradigm, right? So what the I see in you conversation is, I see in you, Zach, the potential for leadership, or to apprentice with me as a small group leader, or to serve in the kids ministry, or to be on the worship lead. So your point of invitation, because people don't have language and license. And it's, by the way, it's not I see in you to serve in my program, right? Yeah. Hey, I see in you, the groundskeeper ministry really needs your help. Like, maybe it is that. Maybe it is that.
Yeah,
but I'm talking about,
you're here.
Yeah.
You might think of garbage.
Yeah. We at Community, we've used this idea of apprenticeship. So there's discipleship and apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is like, I'm going to be an electrician. You're an electrician. I'm going to apprentice with you. You're going to teach me how to be an electrician. And then I'm going to go out and be an electrician. That's awesome. That's what we need to do for like roles in the church. But the I see in you conversation was the thing that changed my life. And I'm not trying to be like, not just that moment, because then it began to, it incented me to think about, okay, God, what else do you actually want to do in my life? And how else are you calling me to be dependent? And Zach, you used the word invitation, because that's what Jesus did. He literally, that's all he did was invite, and follow me. Invite and follow me. He literally asked, he said, yeah, give up everything and all that stuff, but it was invitation. And I'd love us to get better at not just inviting people to serve in the kids ministry. That's awesome. But hey, let's go on a journey together about what it looks like for me to follow Jesus and me to help you follow Jesus.
What does that look like practically, though? You know what I mean? Like, you say, follow me, right? Yeah. But then at some point, there's got to be like some ideas or concrete steps of this discipleship process. And a lot of different churches have a lot of different ideas of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Chris. And I think this is where it's helpful to clarify terms. That's why I like the difference between discipleship, which is life, follow the spiritual life that has no transactional outcome,
right?
And the apprenticeship that as a church leader, as a church leadership team, hey, we would love people to serve more in the church and all that good stuff. And that's a good thing. One of the first things I did is serve in the church. We call them the 3 C's: connect with God, connect with others through serving, and connect with the world through being generous. But there is, hey, I like Zach and Chris. They're hanging out. They got a fire pit on the driveway, and they bring a bunch of guys around. And they sit and they talk about what it looks like to maybe, how hard it is to follow Jesus some days. So just that kind of stuff. Discipleship is not a destination.
Yeah.
It's a journey. There's no, you're a disciple and you're not. I'm a very good disciple some days. Other days I suck.
Yeah.
Like I do. So I hope I'm answering your question.
No, that's great. And so if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is essentially discipleship is building an authentic relationship with someone where you can share your deepest, most honest conversations, and you trust that person, they trust you, and you're walking together. When they fall down, you're picking them up, you're encouraging, you're inviting to repent. Yep. And also knowing that person that you're discipling or walking with is ultimately at some point going to let you down. Like, they're not God, you're not God, I'm not God, Zach's not God. And being in a good enough relationship where you can kind of walk through that and work through it together.
Yeah. That's kingdom life. So, Jesus prays for this, right? And a church is just the outpost of the kingdom. So what we're doing when we invite people in discipleship, we're inviting them into the kingdom life. And the kingdom life is very different than the corporate life. It's frankly very different than the church life. The kingdom life is very different. And so as I step into the kingdom life, going with others, and this is, again, my reading of the way that Jesus does it, is that we do this together and with the guidance and the power and dependent on God. And so those are, and I know there's a lot of practical, like, does that mean I get some coffee with somebody? What if I don't like them? Like, those things need to be worked out contextually, of course. But the idea that you're driving at, Chris, I just wanted to celebrate.
Well, and I think that, and I'm sorry to take all your time, Zach.
You guys,
I mean,
we don't have an allotted amount.
But I think
exactly. Who gets the most talking time?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I work with another pastor who is task oriented, and I'm people oriented. Like, I will spend all my time with people, and we've had conversations where he's like, "You're spending way too much time with that person," because he's checking the boxes. Like, I'm going to do this, and so like when he hears, and I think there's a lot of pastors who are task oriented. So my point being, when somebody hears something like this, I can almost hear like 100 pastors saying, "Just tell me what to do, how to do it." And they don't get it, and it's not because they're dopes or anything. It's just because they are task oriented as opposed to being like more people oriented.
Yep. Yeah. And that's, just the quick hit at New Thing. We have, you asked what a catalyst means. We've developed what we call the movement system. And one of those catalysts is a discipleship catalyst, where we come alongside church leadership teams and help them deeply think through, what does it mean for them to be catalysts for discipleship in their church, in their environment, in their context? So those are all real questions, though, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
So you go to Kansas City, you start a church, your journey, your discipleship journey is continuing. You're taking a few people with you to do this. Yeah, walk me through how that was for you. Was it, and you mentioned earlier that you'd be happy to talk through, and I'd love maybe now to be the time. What did the corporate world kind of do, help or hurt in that time frame for you?
Yeah. So the quick story there is we moved from Kansas City. Now this is what Community has done. So Community's been a church planting church. That helps.
Yeah.
We were part of New Thing. New Thing grew out of this idea that we were just going to be networks of friends on mission. Who were helping each other plant more churches. We're non-denominational, but we moved to Kansas City to be part of changing the spiritual landscape of Kansas City. I know that sounds very dreamy in kingdom, but it's true. We did not go there believing that we were going to do everything. We went there believing that God was already doing great things there and that we were going to come alongside. And what emerged out of that was this notion, and it's what we do at New Thing, is how do we flip the script and make mission the bishop of our city? So if you're a Lutheran church, if you're a Baptist church, if you're a non-denominational church and you're in Omaha, how many churches does God see in Omaha?
Yeah.
One. And so that's the spirit of what we went to Kansas City to do, right? To be a part of what God's doing, to be part of the great tapestry of the kingdom of God, but different and in unity at the same time. And so what set my imagination on fire was this idea that we could reproduce churches, that we can plant new churches, because church planting is the best way to help new people find their way back to God. There's been lots of studies on it. Most people are finding their way back to God at new churches. After about 5 years, that starts to change. Not saying that a church of 50 years is bad. I'm just saying that's why church planting is so important. We've got to keep the blood flowing. We've got to keep the blood flowing. That was all wrapped up in Kansas City.
What's the reasons that you believe are behind that? Because I totally agree, and I've seen the statistic or the numbers that say church planting, opening campuses, that's the way to go. So what are the
and even Andy Stanley says you got to be new, improved, improving. Like you got to do that. But I never understood like what's the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, mission gives life. So the bottom line is we are a missional people. We are a movement. We are not, the end game is not, I love Lutherans, right? The end game is not to be a Lutheran.
Right.
It's not the end game.
Clearly.
The game is Jesus.
So if I hear you correctly, every 5 years, you should just close your old church down.
No. What I'm saying is you should plant churches.
Yeah.
So that's what we do is we try to collect that we collectivize that initiative. It's hard for churches to plant churches. We can get into that if you want. But that's what we're trying to do at New Thing is we say mission gives life. How do you keep blood flowing through the system? You raise up leaders and you send them out. You gather to scatter. That's the whole game. Like, let's make sure we all understand that that's the game. And so that's why new churches have a kind of a missional edge, like a little bit of more teeth at the edge. It's guys like Chris going into the places where people who will never show up at a church are and saying, hey, do you know Jesus? I'm not saying he does it that way, but that's basically what he's doing. Here's my life. Here's myself. Here's my time. That's going to engage people. versus, hey, you know what you should do? Come and hear my great pastor preach on, John 10. All good. But that's not working, and it's actually never worked.
Yeah, he's right.
Am I being fair? I'm not being too harsh, am I?
No.
It's the reality we're in.
Yes.
Even pre-COVID, which everybody wants to now blame COVID, but
right, it was hurting before COVID.
Yeah, you look at the average number per work, for a church, and it was like 130.
COVID just gave people an excuse to stay home, right? A justified excuse.
Yeah, but it had been cut in half,
right,
from 2000 to 2020,
right.
And so it was already reeling, and we have to do something different. We had to change.
Well, and I think you guys brought it up. I've got 3 kids; they're all in their 20s now, and they are church planting. We're a church planting family. As soon as I found my way back to God, it's like, hey, this is what we believe. This is what we do. We're going to do this. Yeah. They're looking for more authentic relationship with Jesus. I think, all the stuff that we've been through, not only in our country, but across the world in the last 4 or 5 years, what the 20 somethings, I just know them because they live in my house, or one of them does, is, Dad, I think I'm on Team Jesus, but I really struggle with the church. I struggle with what we're doing. I struggle with this, all the stuff. Yeah. And I'll let you guys talk about that in another day. But I think if we can just get back to, I'm not saying the local church isn't the essential ecclesiological format. It is. However, Jesus said, go make disciples, not plant churches.
Right.
And that's, if we can just make sure we've got those two things in tandem and tension, we're going to be better off.
Yeah. And I think as we plant churches, that gives opportunity for more disciple making opportunities to come. And that's where they connect. And so you planted in Kansas City. God did a beautiful thing. And now you're the global director of New Thing.
That feels big. That feels really big.
That's bigger than Kansas City. So walk me through. So now New Thing is helping, like we said earlier, catalyze to really get behind and support new church movements, new church plants. So walk me through what your role looks like and what you're seeing in the context of the globe when it comes to either church planting and discipleship.
Yeah. Number one is I look at myself. I'm first of all a student of the global church and of movement, so I have not arrived by any standard, right? Secondly is I would contend that, especially for your North American audience, we need friends in the global church that we can learn from and pray with and journey with. I like to say it's the round table of mission. And even if you're a church leader and you're leading a church in Miami or Omaha, you need to make sure you've got some of the Ugandan church with you. Not literally, but like that whole idea that this is a global movement, right? And so what New Thing does is we try to be that space where churches, I hope we do 2 things very, very well. Number one is we help them reproduce at every level because mission gives life. And then secondly, we help them collaborate with other churches in the spirit where mission is the bishop and not just your castle or your denomination. No offense to any of those things.
Right.
Again, they're part of it. But if I'm in Chicago where I live, our New Thing movement will meet. It's made up of about 50 churches, very diverse, Baptist, Lutherans, Pentecostal, historic Black, and we come together to make our city better through church planting. And the word that comes to mind that we are using a lot these days is flourishing. And so when it comes to the work at New Thing and my work, Zach, is we go around the world finding women and men. We call them persons of peace. They generally have an apostolic gift, and they are ready to kind of get after this kind of work. They are leading churches. They're part of denominations. They might not be part of it, but they're thinking kingdom, and they're dreaming kingdom. And you and I know the apostolic gift. They can't help it, right? They're after it. They're going after like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And then they're using their relational equity to create space for these collaborative conversations. At the end of the day, I call it the great collaboration. We got the great commission to go, of Matthew 28. We've got the great commandment, Mark 12, to love, but the great collaboration of John 17 right? Your unity will literally be a witness to the world. And so if we can pull those elements together, that's what New Thing's trying to do.
It's beautiful. So you have a good lens then of what God is doing in the world, on the globe. So I'd love to know, like, what can American or North American disciples learn from disciples overseas? What's going right over there that sometimes we're off?
Yeah. I think Chris had said, I think relationships. We are North Americans. We approach relationships different than, let's say, our brothers and sisters in Africa. Just a fact. It's not better, not worse. It just is different. We're a little bit more transactional. They're a little bit more relational, right? So a friend of mine from Africa was saying, if you're invited to a wedding, let's say you're going to have a wedding at noon, you're probably not really getting started till about 3:30. and I'm like, so nobody comes at noon? They're like, nah, it's just a suggested start time. So what do the bride and groom do? Well, they just wait. So because they're celebrating, they're having fun, they're in relationship. I would say that's the first thing, is learn that relationships take time, and you need to give some space in your own life to that. And then secondly is the global church, there's just the word obedience comes to mind. They just go out and do it. They just go out and evangelize. They just go out and do this stuff that we talk about. So what we'll find sometimes, and I'm a North American too, tell me more, teach me more. Let me go through that cohort. Let me read that book. And I'm like, I could just go talk to my neighbor about Jesus. Like, I don't need you to tell me anymore. I should go do that. Right. So there is that obedience. So I would say relationship, and a little bit like, no, I'm going to go talk to people about Jesus. Don't do it in a bad way like that. We use what we call the blessed practices. Begin with prayer, listen, eat, serve, and then share your story. And that's kind of that simple missional framework that we help people at New Thing. And I go out and I figure, all right, how do I bless my neighbors? I'm going to pray for my neighbor right over there. I know that their kid's going through some stuff. I'm still serving them in a way, but it's this idea of being obedient as a disciple at the same time.
Yeah, and you get to eat in the middle of that.
Oh, that's the best part.
Perfect. I think that's really great, because for me personally, I know that, as Chris was talking earlier about task-oriented, people-oriented, and you're talking about relationships and transactions, it can easily, for me, jump into transaction. It can jump into task.
Me too.
And so that's, I always have to be cognizant of that and like think through that, because I can, I'll have my list of to-dos and I got to meet with this person, and then I've met with them. So check, I'm good there. I'll move on to this, and I can compartmentalize. And you've really helped me in this, see and remind myself that it's not all about transactions.
Thank you. I feel like our friendship is pretty transactional. So I see nothing else out of this. I thank you. And let me know.
Somehow I've done some couples therapy.
Unbeknownst to you, really cleared some things up here.
I want to press into that second word though, obedience. And so why is it hard for North American Christians to be obedient? It's not a word we like to say, obey. So I think that at the end, that's what it's all about though, is will you stay committed and truly obey Jesus? So why do we struggle with that obedience?
Yeah, I'm a student of this, Zach. So I want to be very careful here. And it's part of my own journey, and maybe this is a way to bring it full circle. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust that anybody would do the right for me when when you come from a broken home. Mm-hmm. You got some of that going on, right? You got some of that trauma. I didn't trust that people in business would do me right. I didn't trust that, my wife would stick around when things got really bad, because you trust yourself. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but speaking of transactional relationships, business, oh my gosh, it's about the bottom dollar. And so you're coming out of this very transactional business world, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So for me, the journey that really opened with Jesus was trusting him. And that was deep work, dude. That was not easy. It's not easy today.
Right.
And so I think obedience is a result of increasing our capacity, our trust for God. I don't exactly know what that looks like, and some of the theologians that you have in your audience could probably dive deeper. But for me, I can't be more obedient till I trust more. And the trusting God for immeasurably more is just I'm not going to figure it out in this life. It's going to be a journey, but I'm hoping that instead of maybe all of my hand closed to God, maybe I've got a few fingers open, like I might have a couple of fingers still like, no, I want to hold on to that. But I can't talk about obedience and trust, without talking about the same. So hope that helps. And I hope I've tried to answer.
I love that answer of starting with it. We have to trust before we obey.
Yeah.
And so how then do we grow in our trust with God? Right. Because faith is ultimately a gift given to us by the Holy Spirit. And so we can't receive unless he gives. And that's complicated and complex.
It comes from hearing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious. Like, I would love to hear from you, like how your trust has grown in your relationship with God,
or maybe how it's wavered during this podcast.
Sure.
I'm just kidding.
It hasn't wavered.
Okay, good.
I think for most guys in North America and most home providers, and let's also put single moms who are running household, it's money, right? It's okay. I gotta provide.
Right.
How do I trust God with my finances? But I'm going to be that guy that says the more generous I was, the more with my finances, the more God was generous in return. Not directly financial, by the way. The more that I've been generous with my life, the more God has blessed me. I really do believe it is. It's as we open our hands, and if it's not like, hey, I'm going to give you everything, God. It's going to be, I'm going to give you this today, God.
Yeah.
Like just that. And the Lord is so good. The Holy Spirit's so powerful. He meets us. I'm convinced of that. So it's a journey. But for me, and then it was people. It was because, if you grow up in a traumatic background or you have some of the issues that I'm sure so many of us have had, it's not easy to trust people that they're going to be there for you, that they're going to do right by you. And God and Jesus always will. He always will. He will. You can trust him. I know that theologically, but practically. So it's prayer, it's meditation, and then it's doing life with other Jesus followers, not just Jesus followers, but other Jesus followers who say, "Hey, we're not perfect. We're going to do this thing together. We're going to follow Jesus together." That's built my trust capacity.
Yeah, it's good. And so it's kind of interesting though when you were describing it at the beginning of the answer there. It was you can't really trust without actually trying something. You said you give away a little. So it is interesting that to trust, you kind of have to give up.
Faith,
you do.
How it works is dead.
Yeah. It's that leap of faith, but it's not like, wait, if I give $1,000 to my local church and the next time I need money, should I expect one in the mailbox? Like those whole kind of illustrations aren't always really cool, but it is like, if I had stayed in the business world, I'd probably be a lot richer. But but God has blessed me. I mean, I get to speak to guys like you. Think about this. Like, it's just amazing. And that all comes from me letting go of some of the stuff that Patrick was hanging on to and trusting more.
You know what's interesting, though? You say that, and that's true, but you also might have been continuing the generational curse of broken families. You might also, would you have the relationship with your kids that you had?
Amen.
And that so much more valuable, right?
Chris, that's exactly right, brother. That's the deep stuff. You're exactly right. I think
that's what I'm known as. I'm a kind of a deep thinker.
Yeah, I love it. I can see you guys together are just like an explosive combination, good and bad, I'm sure.
No. Exactly.
No, you're right. Good and bad. Figure that out.
Right.
This has been super great, and I think I've seen that in my life too. It's like you give up a little bit and you trust, and you see God come through, and that allows you to go bigger next time. And then you see God come through, and you know what? Sometimes it doesn't always work perfectly, but you learn something about God, and you learn something about yourself and others, and keep taking those leaps of faith. All right, Patrick, I've got the question that we ask every guest, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris for a little fun with you. But we like asking all of our guests to challenge. At the end of the day, this podcast is to challenge every disciple to be a greater disciple wherever they are. And so if there's one thing that you'd practically challenge our audience, our listeners, to be greater disciples that they can do this week, what would that be?
Pray, and then invite somebody to coffee and just hear their story.
Cool.
I mean, seriously, like here, whether it's somebody in your church, whether it's a neighbor, hey, I was thinking about you, and I wanted you to know I prayed for you. I'd love to hear your story. I don't know. There's some things I don't know about it, and it's just making maybe that one little space that we don't always make in our lives for that. That would be it, and that goes for me too. Like as I want to preach, I want to do what I say, but I need to hear that too. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, listeners. So if you're taking on Patrick's challenge this week, let's go ahead and hashtag Red Letter Disciple. Let us know as you're praying for someone. We'll pray for you. We want to come alongside of you and hear so much of that BLESS acronym in what you just challenged our listeners. You listen, you eat, you share your story, you hear their story. So really good.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, what you got for Patrick?
Mr. O'Connell, I don't know if you know this, but your first name is Patrick. I don't know if you're aware of that. But we have a team of just very dedicated people who put together custom game shows. And so Cam, can I get you on the mic real quick, Cam? Are you okay? You back there? Are you sleeping? Yeah. Okay, he's awake. So I need you to put 60 seconds on the clock. We're going to play Can You Name the Famous Patrick? Okay. And we're going to see how many Patricks you can name.
Okay.
60 seconds. All right. Let me know, Cam, when we've got it ready to go.
We are ready.
All right. On your marks, get set, go. This Patrick received a Golden Globe nomination for his appearance in Dirty Dancing.
Patrick Swayze.
All right. This Patrick is the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Patrick Mahomes.
I hope you got that one. Yes. This Patrick was a Jamaican-American retired Hall of Fame basketball player. He played at Georgetown. Yes, that is correct.
Do I get something if I win?
No. This Patrick is on College Game Day, was a famous punter, is a commentator for WWE, has a famous podcast, played for the Indianapolis Colts. You can pass if you want. He's also a stand-up. Okay. Patrick McAfee. Come on. Yeah. All right. This Patrick was a football player who left sports career and enlisted in the United States Army. And he was
Tillman. Pat Tillman.
Yes, Patrick Tillman. This Patrick coached the Los Angeles Lakers and Miami Heat. You missed it. You were one away from the brand new Corvette. I am so sorry.
You didn't ask me about St. Patrick. What about St. Patrick?
Nobody's heard of him.
and the other one, he was also famously known as the idiot kicker from Peyton Manning. The one that you passed on was Pat McAfee. Where Aaron Rodgers breaks all of his news every year because Aaron Rodgers has all these breaking news to every year.
I didn't want to mention this. We do have a sponsor this year, Chevrolet. You were one question away from the brand new Corvette. I am so sorry.
Maybe can I come back and try again?
No. Thank you so much. And it was really close.
Yeah.
You will send you a red letter koozie or something. All right.
Awesome. Hey, Patrick, if people want to connect more with you and all the things you're doing at New Thing, where can they find you these days?
www.newthing.org.
That's pretty easy. Newthing.org.
How did you get that website? You have to pay somebody off? That was really good. Yeah.
That's good. All right, Patrick. Hey, man, thanks so much for being a part of the show. God bless you and cheering for what you're doing.
Awesome, brothers. Thanks for having me.
I can't thank Patrick enough for being on today's show. He was incredible. Just an awesome conversationalist. And we learned some really great things about what it looks like to be a disciple today in America. Okay, if you want to connect with Patrick and what he's doing at New Thing, check out our show notes at redletterpodcast.com. There you can find all the links that you'll need. Also there, you'll find the link for that assessment I was talking to you about, that Red Letter Challenge assessment. It'll take you 7 to 10 minutes, but it'll rank you according to the 5 targets of Jesus and really challenge you to take next steps in your faith, which is what it's all about. So next week, we have they're all awesome, but a really awesome guest next week. His name's Mark DeMaz. He's pastor, author, and director of Mosaics Conferences. Mark is, I really believe, leading the way in our nation with helping individuals and churches live in authentic, multi-ethnic relationships. So we talk about what needs disruption in our nation today when it comes to discipleship, how to help people discover their strengths, and even Well, we go on a 1v1 battle on Arkansas. You see, he's a pastor there. And did you know I was born there? So we're going to see who knows more Arkansas. We're going to have some fun with Mark next week. We always have fun. So don't miss it. And the way you don't miss it, by the way, is simple. It's just pressing subscribe or follow on like whatever platform, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or maybe you're watching every week on YouTube. It literally takes maybe 1 second to do that. And that is really good because then all the episodes are going to pop up on your feed magically and amazingly through the power of technology. It's incredible. Don't miss it. It's next week. God bless you. Have a great week, and we'll see you back next week for the Red Letter Disciple.